Hello, welcome BuzzKillas. We're back. We are here today to have a year in review for the cannabis industry, our respective practices and practice areas. And we've brought Canada with us because Kayte Robertson is joining us from Canada as our MJ Biz moderator that we've now befriended and are dragging into our midst for the rest of our days. Included on the panel, you will remember Mia, who is also at MJ Biz speaking with me at the panel. Perry had to step away for a moment, so his compadre Andrew DeWeese from Greenlight Law Group is joining us in order to be able to start in on all the things. Great. A little bit of the agenda. We're going to start year-end review, tax. I'm going to do that, clearly. We're going to kick it around a bit in case people have questions. Feel free, chime in. Mia's going to give us sort of a little bit of a state of the legal on year-end review 2020, highs, lows. Clearly, there were interesting things happening. Kayte's going to give us Canada. Because we keep thinking, I think, in some ways in the United States that the roadway to legalization could have a roadmap Canada is laying down for us. And I think we all kind of disagree with that in some ways. So, we brought Canada. Here's Canada with us. And then Greenlight Law Group is, in fact, just recently entered into a lawsuit against the state of Oregon for dormant commerce clause. All these things are complicated. We wanted to drag in Andrew as the litigating partner lawyer there to talk to us about that. So here we go. Tax still sucks. Still sucks. We did say the CAOA come into the room for a hot second and maybe begin a conversation that might have changed some things for tax. The reality, though, if you listen to our CAOA conversation, is that I disagree that that was a tax schema that was going to work or be better for any of us. I think professionals, as they've looked at it and had more time through the course of the year, continue to agree with that. And sensible drug policy is still a minute away. Or 2 hours, one of the two. But what we did see with the medical legalization bill, the medical research bill that did come in, it is not tax per se, in my mind, but what it says to me as a tax practitioner is something can move through our government. Maybe that does actually give us the ability to see safe banking, which has been introduced 10 or 11 times and keeps passing the House, but not the Senate. Now that we have seen sort of the November 8th shakeout happen in the United States, and we have a clear majority of Democrats in the Senate, maybe, in fact, in this sort of run up to the presidential election, maybe we could at least get safe banking finally moved through, or some sort of sensible drug reform policy there. Safe banking would, again, not change the tax position, which subject to 280E still, but what it would give us would be capacity for some banking, some lending, maybe the ability to help these firms that are having such incredible tax debt, weigh them down, have an opportunity to be able to restructure some of that, or be able to move forward with feeling like their only option isn't not pay or go out of business. We might, we want there not to still be a debtor's prison in this country. And I think safe banking might bring some of those conceptual pieces down the road. Also in tax news in this year, the 471C regs were finalized. They do include that same language that Code Section 280E 263 Cap A uses, that says basically, you can't just use it for cannabis from a timing standpoint. You can't deduct something that in a period where it was supposed to be deductible, you should have deducted, or for any other reason under law, i.e. 280E. But 471C continues to be the predominant methodology that accountants are moving towards and using. I continue to encourage anyone who's working with an accountant or is one, or you are an operator, to use that code section gracefully. Ultimately, it will come up under tax court law, and we want to win, guys. We want it not to be the stinkers that go into tax court and create this horrible precedent we can't rely on. We need a new champs case, a taxpayer friendly case in tax court. And I think the next greatest opportunity for that from a tax standpoint ends up being 471C winning in tax court, not just winning when lawyers go and advocate under audit, but actually going through tax court. So to that end, not much has changed with tax, with the exception that because of the depressed market on the West Coast, because of the frenzy of commerce and economics and you know, on the East Coast, the real decision continues to be either remain cash flow positive and do not file your tax returns, do not manage and deal with your federal income tax debt, which is a strategy. It is a expensive and risky one. Or, you know, try to remain compliant, do not grow, do not expand, do not be a good corporate citizen. I do think that the West Coast is experiencing tax problems that the East Coast will, if they don't take a page from our playbook and try to get regulation under control. If they don't, we, the people in the industry and the legislators, don't get on the page for sensible drug policy reform. We are continuing to incentivize an illicit market position simply by mere economics. Oklahoma is showing us that right now. The conversations that I had when Oklahoma came online were all about, how do I get around 280E? How do I make sure to keep myself cash flow positive? How do I continue to make as much money in the short term as possible? Because this industry is gonna lay it out, and I don't want to deal with my federal taxes. That is not what we want this economy to look like. Bloomberg reported last year, I went and looked up that at the end of 2021, the overall economy of cannabis in 2021 brought $92 billion into our complete economic system. That's legal and illegal. That's a lot of money. Seems like it would be not a lot of money to get legislative folks to pull their heads out of their keisters and figure out sensible drug policy reform. It was slated by Bloomberg in 2022 to go way up 40%. It did not. The 5 predictions that Bloomberg gave us for 2022 were that the cannabis industry, while no longer budding, would continue to grow by 30 or 40%. I think that, and Mia spoke of this in the MJ Biz, when we had a captive population of people at home because of pandemic receiving unemployment funds that were in excess of what they normally were working for, and having the time to be able to both spend recreating at home with weed and or being able to work from home. You know, you had a perfect storm for the industry to have an unrealistic expectation walking into 2022. So that estimate clearly did not work, but they estimated that of the 92 billion, that there would be another 30 to 47 billion added to that number for 2022. I just don't think we're there, but I haven't seen full numbers. Doesn't feel like it to me that we had that big of an industry increase. Bloomberg's second prediction was cannabis will continue to be a tale of two cities, i.e. tons of M&A will continue to happen, and the big guys will get bigger and run the market, and the little guys will get squeezed out. I don't exactly agree with that, but I don't exactly disagree. A lot of M&A is happening, but I think for different reasons than just trying to bigger. You know, mostly cash flow in some ways. We're shutting down a lot of things as well based on cash flow. The third was public support for legalization will remain high on the at the public level, and that corporations will jump in and start also supporting legal cannabis. I really haven't seen corporations put their money where their mouth is in that regard. We have, I think, from a legal standpoint, seen some people some corporations not doing drug testing, but public support remains very high, which is, again, why can't our government align itself with some sensible drug policy for with the population that's in this country. The fourth was states will continue to lead the way on legalization and reform. Check. We doing it. States are doing it because Fed isn't. Again, would love to see states starting to, which is why it's so both interesting and problematic that Greenlight is suing the states. It would be nice to see the states be able to have some chutzpah and get a backbone and start talking to the federal government about these disconnects and become our advocates instead of problematic folks. And then the fifth was some federal legalization bills will be reintroduced, but likely won't make it past the finish line. Again, check. We had more act. We had the CAOA. We had the SRA, States Reform Act. Don't know much about that. Clearly, that didn't go far. And then we have the safe banking has been introduced, reintroduced, still continues to fail. And then here comes the Medical Research Act. Check. Yay, win. So I feel like if we're going into 22, I do have the glimmerest of hopes that because there has such high support, we really do have the states seeing tax problems coming from their regulated groups, that the states will move into a position of trying to advocate for this their internal industries, either through interstate compact or other, and that federally we will finally get safe banking over the line. I don't think CAOA, I think CAOA should be dead or reworked completely. And I do think that, the MORE Act, yes, expunge more people, but we need 280E tax, we need sensible tax policy reform. So if we could get some safe banking in, that would be a great first step. We finally got a standalone cannabis bill through our system. So I feel like if we've kind of broken the ice there, the lawyers will be able to speak to that in better ways than me. But I feel like finally, if we can get anything moved, the baby steps are beginning to start. Maybe we'll get some momentum. That segues me straight into Mia from the year-end review law update. Take it away, Mia.
Yeah, thanks, Kayte. You touched on a lot of the things I want to talk about, which is great. So we, everybody know, I'm gonna. We've got two things that went on this year. You kind of split the country into two parts. You've got the mature markets, and then you've got the new markets. Whether we're talking about online, not very old, or came online this year, or voted to legalize this year. Everybody in that second category, we've seen there are people making money. There's some chaos. Everything we've seen kind of as legalization has moved throughout the country. For the mature markets, where of course we all operate in, or at least primarily operate in, and then moving into some of these other markets, but things haven't been good. I think everybody knows that. So about a year ago this time, I think everybody pretty much thought that this was one of these normal cyclical dips. We've seen these come every couple of years. Prices are going to drop, demand's going to drop, but don't worry, sometime around beginning of the year, February, everything's going to start looking better. It's going to be a great year. Yeah, we're going to lose some businesses, but honestly, those are probably the ones that were not going to make it very long anyway, and get kind of that little bit of a purge done, get a little bit of new blood, and the businesses that survived through it are going to be great in 2022. That is not what happened. And going into the end of the year, we were seeing, a lot of companies just hunker down and figure let's just kind of eke by until things pick up. And a lot of companies thought, well, this is temporary, and look how good we did in 2020. Like Kayte said, when the best customers in the industry were most likely to be out of work, most likely to be making more on unemployment than they were making at their, sadly low paying jobs. And spending a bunch of money. And then, and so everybody picked up production, expanded. If they couldn't do that on cash flow, which of course, most can't if you're trying to grow quickly, they would take loans. Of course, Safe Banking Act has not passed and had not passed by then. So they're not going to the bank and getting out a loan. They're going to a hard money lender, or they're lending against their business assets, typically with real estate. If it's not hard money, it's typically, it's typically pretty well secured, oftentimes by personal assets, personal guarantees, all that. So they took these loans that are, pretty risky, because honestly, this industry just doesn't have much of another option. And they expanded. And then we get into 2022, and January comes, and February comes, and March comes, and April comes, and these prices just aren't coming back up. But I think most people still thought, okay, well, during the summer, it's going to be good, or it's at least not going to be bad. And it did not get good, and it stayed bad. And so, a lot of things started happening. We started seeing, businesses not do projects that they had planned to do, whether those are big, exciting, interesting projects, or just things they need to do for cleanup, or to be more efficient, or to have their businesses kind of mature as they grow, because they didn't have the money to spend, on new acquisitions. They didn't have the money to spend on legal fees for projects that weren't actually necessary. And we also started seeing, the transactions did happen, prices dip really low. License prices, in Oregon, licenses are not transferable, but they are. License prices plummeted to, a fraction of what they were worth before. Businesses being sold for a fraction of the debt the business owes, or hopefully all the debt, but the business owners who had a year, 2 years before, really successful, valuable business, get out with nothing because they just need to cut their losses. Obviously this is a good opportunity for entrepreneurs who want to get in the industry and want to get in low in these mature markets. But typically those entrepreneurs wanting to get in, and the ones with more money, are more excited about the new states coming online. I mean, New York's the big one. Not a lot of people are raising a bunch of money to come and buy businesses in Oregon and Washington and Colorado. They're raising money to go buy, in these new markets, and in particular New York. So yeah, and we're still seeing a lot of the fallout from that. We're seeing the fallout in the licensed entities, as these expansion projects, fail to actually bring in additional revenue, and business owners are having trouble making payments on the the loans they took, if they did take loans. Those businesses that kind of hunkered down to try to ride it out rather than expanding through it, they tend to be doing a lot better. They're still suffering because they're still facing the same business environment, but if they went through without taking on debt and just kind of cut some overhead and decide to eke through and take the risk that they don't expand when everyone else does, and then they're behind, that turned out to be the smart move. We're also seeing, we're seeing some havoc with some of the bigger companies, including some of the public companies, clearly having issues, not filing financial reports. I didn't expect to see that. I actually, when I was told about one of these companies not filing financial reports, I thought the attorney telling me that was confused. I was like, oh no, you don't understand. They're public. their financial reports are online. And no, they didn't file them. Like, no, you don't understand. They did because they're public. Here, come in my office. We'll pull it up and went, oh my gosh, there's no financials. So, we're also seeing some chaos at ancillary businesses. Those of us who support the industry. I know it's been tough for professional service providers. We're small businesses for the most part. Most of the law firms, CPA firms, other service providers that service the industry tend to be small businesses because the real big ones, are much more hesitant to get into the industry. We're feeling it. I'm sure, people have seen in the last little bit, we've seen, Weed Maps, I believe, laid off about a quarter of their employees. Dutchie, I think they won MJBizCon for having the best swag. And I have been wearing those slippers. But a lawsuit was just filed. It might've been yesterday. I saw about it yesterday, within the last few days, at least. Apparently, the founders say that there was, a coup or an attempted coup by the board. And so there's a lawsuit going on there. So, we've got all this kind of mess of things going on right now. I'm hesitant to see that we're seeing some signs of the market firming back up. But from my little view, I am seeing a little bit of that. I am seeing more variety in purchase prices for businesses. Some of these businesses, the purchase prices are coming back up to look more like they used to. Not crazy numbers, but I am seeing prices come back up. I am hearing from clients that, just more and more of these little stories like, I don't want to get my hopes up, but, we're having a good week, and right now having a good week is saying a lot. Hopefully that turns into, the occasional good month and more. I still think I don't think anybody's gonna, feel real good for quite some time, but I'm hoping that 2023, the market does firm back up. We start seeing, sales coming back up, or at least some more equilibriums being met. But honestly, I think it's going to be really tough until the economy improves, because, when your customers don't have that discretionary income, to spend, they're not going to spend it. And of course, one of the things that really bums me out about that too is that, people just aren't buying top shelf weed right now. It's moving really slowly. People are buying weed. They are buying cheap weed because, again, they have to put gas in their car. They have to, feed themselves and their families. They have to pay rent. And not only is that leading to some of our, best producers in the state, best in terms of quality, really suffering or just going out of business, despite, some of these indoor producers who make, what everybody can agree is just, objectively amazing flower, having a really hard time making it because they can't move product. That also necessarily is going to mean that we start seeing a reduction in quality. And, is that as big of a deal as the businesses, going under and the other issues we're seeing in the industry? No, but is that sad? Yeah, I think it is. I think it's really sad. Yeah.
If I can interrupt you, though, I really think that you've hit on a really important point that we should, in fact, talk about maybe at some point, which is if this product came from a medical position, and one of the strengths of Oregon and other states coming online is this idea of this medical, the Research Act coming in, this medical goodness, this capacity to be able to have a medical product. We don't want those genetics to vanish. We don't want this to get driven back into the illicit market. You bring a huge point to bear that really maybe everybody isn't going to afford top shelf. What looks like top shelf in regulated adult use is the medical product. We want to remain to be here. And if that goes, we are at risk here in lots of ways. When producers don't, like you guys, don't have the ability to stay in the market. I'm sorry to interrupt you, but I think that that's a medical conversation kind of coming back into the room in a way I haven't seen. I've just seen recreational kind of push medical as out of the room. And I really think medical needs to still be as a conversation in the room.
Yeah, well, and that is there. We could spend this entire webinar and then some, kind of unpacking that and what that all means and the interplay between the various systems. But yeah, absolutely. And what does it look like if we go into, a national marketplace and, and almost everything that Oregon's producing is medium quality or below. And again, not because there isn't talent here, not because the strains aren't here, not because the knowledge isn't here, but because, you can't have your cost of production above, your sale price, and you can't grow more than you can sell, or you're not going to be here in a year or however long. So, okay, that was a lot. Kayte, thank you for interrupting me. I don't know if anybody else has any comments or questions, or we just want to pass it off to Canada.
Well, I do think it would be interesting because, again, we have this medical recreational disconnect. Here comes Canada, right? Canada's supposedly has the ability to transact, and we don't, here's strains and here's a market that can take medical or recreational. And then again, it's been very enlightening to have Kayte bring her view in to just educate me. The Canada nut isn't all roses, which we expect. I mean, it's not thorns completely, but take it away. I think these are interesting topics.
For sure. Yeah. I mean, I have to say, I hope I'm not repeating a lot of the same things that Kayte and Mia have both talked about, because a lot of it is very similar in Canada. So very quick overview on the Canadian market. We are federally legal. Distribution is all provincially regulated. And so some stores in some provinces are actually government operated. And then in most provinces, they are privately run. But in the province that I'm in, Ontario, which is the most populous province, we have one wholesaler that's run by the government of Ontario. And so every store is very similar. It carries a lot of the same products. And we have a vastly oversupplied market in Canada. I think there are more than 900 licenses. So that includes, cultivators and manufacturers producing products for a country that's about the size of California. And we are very much in the right sizing phase. So I think my colleague Matt reports on Canada exclusively and digs up these numbers every quarter. But I think last year we destroyed like 425 million grams of cannabis that just wasn't sold. And so you can imagine, if you are a producer, how desperate you are to get your products to consumers, get your products on store shelves. And because of that oversupply, prices, of course, have, similar to the markets that you're speaking of, prices have come down significantly. And so one of the major issues that producers are dealing with right now is the tax rate. And so under the Federal Cannabis Act, the tax rate, I think, is $1 a gram or 10% of the value, whichever of those is greater. So you can, again, imagine if you are a small cultivator on Vancouver Island, and you're producing a pretty small amount of premium cannabis and you're paying those kinds of tax rates, what a burden that would be. And then
because the tax is pre the sale. So they're putting up the cash. they're putting up the cash and then they're not getting it back at the sale price that they need. That's never a
right.
winning
That's
solution.
right. And I mean, you know, that can be, yeah. So that's like the number one issue I think people would like to see changed. I have to admit, I'm a bit shocked that that was agreed upon to begin with. Like, I keep trying to remember what those conversations were like back when they were forming the act, because surely someone must have thought about price changes. But I think everyone sort of thought that like $10 a gram would be the price of cannabis, and people would be able to deal with this. So that is the issue. And then in addition to that, the government of Canada has finally begun its review of the Cannabis Act, which people are very excited about. I tend to be a little bit pessimistic, I think, about these types of things from an industry perspective, because I don't think the government has quite realized that creating a thriving cannabis industry does align with its public health goals, which is to, you know, chip away at that illicit market, get people into the regulated market, get people consuming safe, tested products, all of these things. That really does start, I think, with a healthy industry. And so maybe they'll start connecting those dots. I think there's just a lot of concern about looking, you know, pro weed or pro cannabis industry, which is, you know, of course that's the case. Another big issue that would really help the industry out, and I think might be addressed in this Cannabis Act review, is we currently have a THC limit on edibles at 10 milligrams per package. And so, you know, all these drinks that people are, you know, so stoked on, or gummies or any of those things, you buy a package and, you know, there might be 5 gummies in it, but they only have, you know, 2 milligrams of cannabis per gummy. And so obviously when you're trying to convince people to buy regulated products, but they are frequent consumers or long time consumers, 10 milligrams is not going to cut it. And so again, people are really advocating to see that limit increase. I think there might be a good case for that. I think you know, like similar to the US, we've had a lot of cases of child poisonings by edibles, and a lot of the time the culprit is an unregulated edible product that looks like candy, that looks like Sour Patch Kids or whatever, and then kids find it, they get into it, and they end up in the hospital. And so to me, that's a great case to increase that limit. We will see what happens. Another big issue is diversity. So I was telling the team yesterday, I think that you know, as a Canadian watching all of these social equity programs get launched in US markets is really exciting. It's quite surprising. In Canada, we have done none of that. There, you know, have not been efforts to right the wrongs of the war on drugs. I think that Canadians feel that, you know, the war on drugs, that's an American thing. That's not something that happened here. However, you know, when you look at arrest rates or police interactions, and you compare, you know, who gets stopped and asked if and searched in certain communities in Canada and who doesn't, it's very clear that, you know, people of color, First Nations people have been disproportionately impacted by prohibition. And it's wrong and it's not fair. And we probably, you know, should have done something to, not just like from an ethical perspective, but I think also, again, from you know, is this program going to be successful perspective, where, you know, without those programs, people have a very negative take on legalization itself. You know, we're not doing it right, and so there's less buy-in, I think. And so I'm very curious to see what exactly happens. I think one piece of it is expunging criminal records and actually following through on that. There's currently a pardon program where you can apply. It costs money to get your record expunged. But I don't think it's a full expungement. I think it's like a partial. But there's been very little uptake. I think people are like, why would I pay money to do this when it should just be free? It should just be automatic. And so really hope to see some movement there. And then another piece is around, you know, getting more diversity and engagement in the industry. And I think First Nations communities are an interesting one. Again, similar to the US, there are several communities that have kind of launched their own, you know, mini industries. I think they're doing quite well, but they're not regulated by Health Canada. And some areas or communities of people would really like to be involved in the Health Canada program and feel like they haven't really been invited in. And so there's some work there that needs to be done for sure.
Kate, can I ask you from a Canadian tax side? I mean, they have the same tax. Does a sovereign nation in Canada, I don't know if it works the same way. In the United States, clearly the sovereign nations are exempt from the 280E position, which makes it quite attractive. But
Yeah.
you know, you don't have 280E. So then do they have some sort of punitive taxation schedule, or are they immune from this $1 a gram at the like, is there some sort of preferential piece there that would maybe begin to be able to incentivize them, or is it all just straight across the board the same?
No, you're right. Like it's they operate independently. They would not be paying that tax. And so there are some people who are like, well, then, you know, what's the problem? Like, it sounds like a great, setup. And I think we might start to see some partnerships arise between Health Canada regulated companies and First Nations communities. Although I don't know, my guess is they would still have to pay those taxes. But I mean, there's some really excellent products being, you know, grown and manufactured that are not Health Canada regulated. But I have no idea how they are regulated. And yeah, I mean, I have friends who like only buy from First Nations communities because the prices are great and the products are great. So,
but there again, the risk, that same problem the United States has of two competing regulatory schemas, two competing regulated or unregulated market, which one gets the stigma of not being Health Canada versus the other? Like, it does not. It is an unclear message to the consumer population. Even if it is only the size of California, it's still an unclear message. And ultimately, if we have an international capacity in the future to do transactional work across this border, that's where those things slam up against each other, you know, is either tax or regulation or both.
100%. And I think really just goes to show how important those conversations were and should, you know, how, you know, that should have happened early on. And yeah, I mean, I think my guess is that the government was like, ooh, we don't want to get all wrapped up in that, you know, that'll be complicated. But you know, very necessary, and yeah, that's too bad. So I hope to see some of that change as well. And then the last thing I'll mention is an Ontario thing that's come up recently. You know, I mentioned before that there's very little diversity between the products available on store shelves. What the licensed cultivators and producers would like to see is the ability to just negotiate directly with retailers. You know, they want to have exclusivity, and you know, that way we will start to see some diversity between the stores. And we've gotten nowhere on that so far. So what has happened is this sort of pay to play environment, which is not legal, but no one, I don't think, is really doing anything about it, where producers are simply
Uh-oh. Damn you, technology.
Yeah, I thought that was on my end.
It was about to get really good too.
I know, I was like, pay to play,
Can you hear
we all lean in. Okay,
There
start
you
back
are.
at, yes, yeah, you're back. Start back
Okay,
at pay
great.
to play.
So I mean, I'll wrap up, but I'll just say, you know, people, it's interesting. Like, I think people want the ability to negotiate those. And with these larger companies kind of operating at a loss and waiting to see, you know, who crashes and burns in the meantime, it's just not fair. And so we'll see what happens.
I appreciate that, Kate, because I think that leads really nicely into where Andrew is going, because when you have these two separated regulation, or, you know, two separated regulatory schemas, which clearly I didn't realize Canada had that sort of similar problem, you sue the state. Ultimately, eventually, I think you got to sue, like something's gonna come to bear with that. So, you know, there's pros and cons to your guys' website, or your lawsuit, excuse me, more tea. But let's dig into that, Andrew, because that really is the big thing coming out of the state of Oregon right now, at this point, at this junction.
Sure. So, you know, as everybody knows, we have this weird situation with marijuana in this country, where it is federally illegal, but legal in certain states, and legal to different extents in different states. And this is a weird situation. I can't think of any other analogous substance or product that has anything in common with this situation, although now psilocybin, you know, now that Oregon has legalized psilocybin for you know, therapeutic use. I'm going to get in trouble because it's not therapeutic, it's adult use, let's call it. You know, we will have that same situation with psilocybin, but in the marijuana context, it's much more aggravated, because we have, you know, I think a majority of the states now have some form of a regulated marijuana program, whether it's you know, recreational like we have here in Oregon, or medical as they have in Oklahoma and some other states. And, you know, this situation of having states legalizing something which is expressly and very illegal under federal law, you know, brings its own, you know, panoply of weird constitutional issues. You know, can you have a situation where a federal law is not being enforced, you know, systematically, and where states are actively licensing and allowing people to break federal law? You know, how does that work under our system of federalism? It's a complicated question that we're not addressing yet. What we're addressing in our lawsuit is sort of much more basic, and that is, in the state of Oregon, as in probably all of the other states, there is a law, a state law, Oregon law, which, you know, has as its purpose and its effect, it makes it a crime for anyone to import or export marijuana in or out of the state of Oregon. That's, you know, that's the crime. It's not possession, it's not manufacture, it's strictly based around whether or not you're taking it over the border, either direction. And so in that way, it regulates interstate commerce. It says, here's a product which you cannot trade in interstate commerce. This is a law that's been on the books for quite some time. If folks remember, back in the early days of state legalization, there was this federal enforcement memorandum called the Cole Memorandum. And what the Cole Memorandum was a policy directive, basically written by an assistant United States attorney. Shoot, I forgot his first name, but his last name was Cole. And what it said was, hey, all of you, assistant United States attorneys and United States attorneys for all of you states, here is how the Federal Department of Justice is going to set its enforcement priorities relative to marijuana in states where it is legal. And it basically says, it said, as long as a few federal concerns are not being implemented in those states, enforcement of the, thanks Mia, it's James Cole, enforcement of federal law relating to marijuana in state legal states is going to be a very low, or perhaps the lowest, federal enforcement priority. As people might know, there are a ton of federal laws on the books, but there are comparatively fewer federal law enforcement folks out there, many fewer than state law enforcement folks. So federal law enforcement often doesn't have the resources to prosecute all instances of federal crimes. So they will frequently set enforcement priorities dictating what crimes to use their limited resources on. So one of those priorities that was stated in the Cole Memorandum was to prevent the transfer of marijuana between states. A lot of people sort of thought that meant, okay, from a legal state to an illegal state, but that wasn't specified in the Cole Memorandum. So these state laws prohibiting export between the states have stayed on the books, even though the states themselves have legalized marijuana within those states. Now, all laws in the US are subject to review against the federal Constitution, which is the supreme law of the land. And there is a provision of the federal Constitution which is referred to as the Commerce Clause. And what the Commerce Clause says is that Congress shall have the right to regulate commerce between the several states. And because our government is a system of enumerated powers, that section of the Constitution tells Congress, hey, Congress, you can pass laws saying how commerce between states can work. So if Congress wanted to pass a law saying, Oregon, you can't import or export cannabis, it could. It hasn't, but it could. What it's done is it passed the Controlled Substances Act, which just says cannabis is illegal, right? There's nothing in the Controlled Substances Act saying, you can't bring it from one state to another, although that is inherent in the fact that you can't possess it or it's a crime. But in any case, a judicially fashioned corollary to the Commerce Clause is called the Dormant Commerce Clause. And what the Dormant Commerce Clause is basically, it says, okay, Congress shall regulate commerce between the states. What that means is the states can't regulate commerce. Okay, only Congress can regulate commerce. So states, for example, Oregon, for example, couldn't pass a law saying no one in this state or anybody in this state cannot export hazelnuts from this state, or a timber from this state, or milk, or whatever. And the same way, we couldn't decide to, protect our, I'll use hazelnuts again. Oregon's a big hazelnut producer. We couldn't protect our hazelnut industry by saying no other states may import hazelnuts into Oregon. That would be a violation of the Dormant Commerce Clause. Well, we do have this law in the books that says no one can import marijuana and no one can export marijuana.
And did it come in when we legalized, or when did that? Is this old? Is it new? Is it like?
I don't know, actually. When the history of the import-export law, I don't know whether it was there.
Because clearly it doesn't exist for hazelnuts. So if it's cannabis specific, like, was it 97 when we did medical? Was it, 14 when we legalized for 50? I guess it doesn't matter,
Yeah.
but.
No, I actually don't know, but it's not relevant to whether or not it's, the law is constitutional or not. Well, I tend to think that it was probably, if I had to guess, I would say it was probably in response to the Cole memorandum, and it was probably in Measure 91 or something.
Right.
But honestly, I don't know. The point though is that it regulates in an area which the Constitution specifically reserves for Congress. So what our lawsuit is real simple. It's just a filing in the federal court for the District of Oregon in downtown Portland by our client who has a marijuana wholesale license. And thank you, Mia. Mia is saying that the export law was indeed in Measure 91. So that's very.
And I don't know that it might very well have existed before that. I'm not looking at the statutory history, but yeah, it is in Measure 91.
It probably was. It probably was in response to the Cole memorandum. So this, whenever it arose, it's been around for years.
Yeah.
And it's gone unchallenged, I think, because generally folks think, well, marijuana is different. Marijuana is illegal under federal law, and there hasn't been a whole lot of appetite for bringing marijuana cases in federal court. So for us, that changed with the medical marijuana case out of Maine, where the opinion was issued by the First Circuit Court of Appeals, which is a federal appellate court which covers Maine and most of New England. In Puerto Rico also. And what that federal court said was the Michigan law, which restricts medical marijuana licenses to folks who have Michigan residency, was unconstitutional under the Dormant Commerce Clause. So we saw that court decision and we said, you know what, number one, things are getting pretty dire here in Oregon. There are a lot of great producers who are producing great product that they can't sell in the legal market, and
Can't take to Nevada because of this rule.
To California, although I think there might be some demand in California, but certainly less than in Nevada. They can't take it to any other state. So folks are having a hard time. And we saw the decision out of the First Circuit, and we thought, maybe now federal courts are going to be more willing to look at marijuana the same way as they might any other product. So maybe now it's time to try to do what we can to push the envelope on interstate commerce. So.
But to be clear, if you win, what happens if you win? Interstate commerce doesn't happen. You just win the right to ask to have the next step, right?
One of the barriers for interstate commerce is actually state law. So that, it is the barrier, right? It is interstate commerce. Federal law really is theoretically a barrier, but, I don't think from a legal perspective, there's any difference from a farm in Southern Oregon sending, 100 pounds to a distributor, a licensed distributor in Oregon, or sending 100 pounds to a licensed distributor in Nevada. From a federal law perspective, it's all trafficking. It's all the
Right.
same. It's Oregon law and Nevada law which prohibit those shipments from taking place. So now, if we win the lawsuit, what we'll then advocate for is that the state of Oregon put into place regulations allowing the interstate transport of cannabis, as long as the Oregon regulatory system can sort of shake hands with the regulatory system of the other state, where the destination state of the cannabis
So
product.
Nevada would have to do a similar lawsuit and create a schema that both Nevada state would allow import export and Oregon state would allow import export, and then third step would be handshake or something, because since it's all federally illegal, you're taking that conceptual idea off the table with this lawsuit, correct?
Well, not necessarily. So Nevada, using it as an example, is in the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals, and so is Oregon. So
Right.
if we win in the Oregon District Court, or if we lose in the Oregon District Court, I expect either way, one of the parties, either us or the state, will appeal it to the Ninth Circuit. And if we prevail in the Ninth Circuit, the Ninth Circuit decision will apply to all of the other
Nevada, right.
export laws in states which are part of the Ninth Circuit. So it will apply to Nevada. And at that point, there should be no state law impediment to interstate transport within states in the Ninth Circuit.
Interesting. Okay. But so let's say, well, never mind. Keep going. I'll formulate my question and see if you answer.
No, I mean, that's basically it. That's what the lawsuit is. I hope we win. I don't know really what our chances are. It seems to me if the federal court treats marijuana like any other product, we have a good shot at winning. We should win under the Constitution. But one thing we don't know yet is how the Oregon defendants, because we're not technically suing the state of Oregon, because the state of Oregon itself has sovereign immunity. What we're doing is suing the state officials in Oregon who are responsible for enforcing the export law. So we're suing the governor, the attorney general, and the executive director of the OLCC. We don't know how they're going to respond yet. They still have quite a bit of time to respond. We don't expect to see a response from them until early 2023. And they could respond in a few different ways. They could try to contest everything. They could try to make arguments that our plaintiff is not the appropriate plaintiff. Who knows what they're going to do. So in some ways, it's difficult now to predict what's going to happen with the lawsuit. But the main question in the case, I think, we have a very strong case on, which is, can Oregon regulate interstate commerce in cannabis? And I think the answer to that question is clearly no under the Dormant Commerce Clause.
And then if that answer, let's say the best case scenario happens, it gets shot up to Ninth Circuit. Ninth Circuit controls the West Coast. The West Coast has a lot of states that touch each other that are regulated, not just Nevada and Oregon, but Nevada is the largest consumer facing state for our supply chains, respectively, Washington, California, Oregon. If Oregon wins, or if you win at the state level and then the Ninth Circuit takes that up and then deems, sure, or the state of Oregon cannot do this regulation piece, that would at least lay the groundwork for reasonable conversation between Nevada and Oregon. No matter who, we have a lame duck governor right now or whatever, no matter who is at the top of that pile, it would open the door for that. My concern, of course, ends up being because you have to sue people, not the states, that it disincentivizes the heads of those respective regulatory bodies from then playing nice with us because we just sued them. But I mean, I don't know that we take that, those folks take that stuff personally. When you take on that kind of a state level job, you kind of are opening yourself up to be the punching bag.
I mean, I think that's right. You know, I think that we have very, you know, professional state government folks. And I think that they are savvy and professional enough to understand why we need to sue them in the way that we do. I mean, you know, the concept of sovereign immunity is very, you know, well established under law. There's even you know, and the OLCC in particular, you know, there is a law on the books in Oregon that the personnel of the OLCC can't be sued, and the OLCC, you know, can't be sued for any activities under, you know, ORS 475C and the provisions under licensing. So, you know, we certainly don't want to sue anybody personally for doing their job. We're just, if we want to make change, we're required to. So, you know, we hope that nobody who we're suing personally takes it personally.
Well, I mean, that's the catch-22 in law in lots of different arenas. So I want to be sensitive to time. We're at noon. You know, we can talk about this stuff for another 18 hours and nobody wants to listen to us yammer on, but you know, I don't know if
we'll
there's
all listen to you for hours.
We'd have to bring in drinks or weed if we're going to stay this long, much longer. I just want to open it up. If there was a question on the floor, Jason or Savannah or, oh, hi, Savannah, or Brian or whatever, if there is a question, I don't know if you shot it to Selden or if we have anything sort of happening, but if there's a Q&A, let's pop it out there. Okay. Jason Quinn. What state are you in, Jason? Did it stay here? Questions. So we have the sluggish, New Jersey. So we have the sluggish state of the economy, minimizing the impact that cost and quality strategies can have on a retailer and distributor and grower's ability to compete within the legal supply chain. Check. And then on top of that, the businesses are competing not only with the government, 280E, check, but also the illicit market, check, where there are no taxes, virtually no overhead and no cost, there's overhead, no cost of compliance, but no taxes and no cost of compliance, 100%. Feels like the legal markets need to not compete with itself. Well, that'd be nice. Is this a fair thought? And if it is, have you thought of legal collaborative opportunities for these legal businesses trying to do the right thing? I haven't thought much on it. This is a great question. I haven't thought much on it, but one idea that comes to mind are group purchasing organizations. Again, maybe this lawsuit that Andrew's got helps with that, or conceptually or not, I don't know. Would love to hear your thoughts on how the legal market might benefit, if at all, from not trying to compete with their legal neighbor, but rather cooperate with one another. Yeah, Jason, that's a great question. Lawyers, which one of you wants to take it? And maybe we need to take this collaboration idea, Selden or whomever, offline and think about a whole hour on this concept, because I think that's a great question.
Yeah, so we've had a lot of this stuff come up over, and we've had this ideas like this come up throughout the years. Obviously, in the last, whatever year and a half or so, it started, we've looked at more ideas, and I think Andrew will echo some of this, because I know, the couple ideas I'm going to mention, I believe Greenlights actually are also was looking at or did, or I've worked with them on some of these matters, but the ideas of co-ops come up a lot, and there are benefits. There are a lot of benefits. There are, the benefits that come out of this screwed up market, where you can, lower costs and everything. There's the potential for significant tax benefits. And then what we're seeing also is licensees kind of working together and finding these efficiencies, and where you might have, everybody's looking at producers and seeing that a lot of these producers are folding, or they just can't sell product. Where, well, if I have a different license type and I want to lock in really low prices, you know, I might be able to make an arrangement with, you know, with the farm. You know, you can all see that between, you know, retailers or wholesalers and processors, but you know, since farms are taking kind of a unique hit, retailers are taking a unique hit just in a different way. You know, I think producers are where there's a lot of opportunities for this mostly. You know, I might enter into.
Are you talking about exclusivity contract work pieces?
Well, exclusivity contracts, or even if they're not exclusivity, you know, arrangements, locking in prices for the year, and then through that, the producer gets what they need. The producer, you know, has a commitment, you know, commitment for to move at least a certain amount of their product, and maybe at even lower prices, but at least they can move it, because that's a big part of the problem we're seeing.
The budgeting for cash flow that then coincides with that piece can bring some comfort is another way to say it from a tax standpoint. Yes.
There's a couple of things. There's cash flow. And then there's also the uncertainty about what's going to happen to prices. And even at the low prices, will you move your product? And if you're worried about cash flow and you can come up with some money, you know, if you forecast based on current prices and selling everything you grow, that's one thing. If you know, if you're having troubles with cash flow and you don't know if you're going to be able to sell your product even really cheap, that's a lot scarier. You know, I mean, if you don't have the cash flow to, you know, put plants in the ground for the coming season, you know, are you taking a hard money loan, or taking, you know, investment or loan money on, you know, otherwise on, you know, kind of scary terms? Are you putting up your own money? You know, and there are businesses, while it might be difficult, they can get through if they just know that their product's going to be bought, even if it's at a low price. So you can see these efficiencies. And then obviously the licensee that's on the other end of that is getting a deal too. So
but technically, Jason's question, sorry to interrupt you. Jason's question really is about this concept of cooperative, and a cooperative is an actual thing. It's not just I mean, there are farms that could come together and try to have a shared services back end, or have some sort of relationship where one has a wholesale and maybe everybody's trying to move through it. Historically, I have not seen things like group purchasing organizations and the like, whatever, because the way that at least the state of Oregon, now maybe you have some opportunity in New York, New Jersey, but the way the state of Oregon has worked is it's one license. This is the thing you do. One license, one license, one license, one license. This idea of shared licenses or cooperative licensing has not come into our regulatory framework or schema yet, but potentially could. And I think is going to be one of the things as we look towards the end of prohibition. What does B Corp look like for cannabis? What does a cooperative look like for cannabis? What does shared services look like? Because economies of scale are a thing that the regular economy is looking to do, and MSOs are potentially being able to have that opportunity simply by the nature of their structures. You know, do we have an opportunity, I think, to your point, to see the smaller producer, the smaller organization, the newer industry, especially if we were to drag DEI in the room, that opportunity where the state regulatory schema would look towards that group and have them stop infighting, have them stop trying to price lower, you know, lowest cost down, like it race to the bottom. And I think that, correct me if I'm wrong, you're clearly putting your words, I'm putting your words in your mouth, but it feels like this would be a great conversation for the lawyers of us in the room to, and CPAs or whatever, to be able to bring some sort of piece of a solution, because ultimately we know legislators aren't making those solutions. They're looking to people external to their environment to do that. And I think that this would be a very interesting regulatory conversation to have, especially as we're talking with CanRA, the regulatory bodies that come together, because I do think that this could be a solution, especially for our small Oregon market producers and the like, to stop trying to eat each other or themselves alive and be able to try to come in and bring these things together. That's a huge question, Jason. Great question, but that's a huge question.
Yeah, and I think, you know, it's a really exciting topic. You know, again, I'd love to hear if Andrew, courtesy on it. I've looked at it some. You know, it's gonna take meaningful legal fees, and you know, tax analysis and everything to actually get one done. I have not completed one. We have looked at them and, you know, and never got past that, you know, research stage.
Yeah, so there is actually a co-op that is formed and is developing in Southern Oregon with a bunch of you know, real OGs of the industry, real folks with a real environmental commitment and commitment to craft cannabis. It's called the Southern Oregon Family Farms. And I've become involved with them as an advisor to the board. And it's really encouraging because you know, since the cannabis market has been doing what it's been doing, you know, my client base has always been, you know, farmers, and I've seen, you know, them suffering. I remember the moment when I that sparked these thoughts was when somebody in our circles said, you know, wouldn't it be great if we could all just agree on a floor price for a specific grade of marijuana, and none of us growers, you know, in this group who are, you know, growing using these, you know, special methodologies would accept less than X price per pound. And my reaction to that, you know, as a relatively educated lawyer was, well, you can't do that. That's price fixing. You know, that's going to be an antitrust violation. But I was wrong, at least in the context of agricultural producers. So if you have, you know, a bunch of, say, appliance stores, you know, in Portland, and the owners of the appliance stores get together and they say, okay, you know what, let's not sell any TVs for less than $200. You know, that arrangement is going to draw an antitrust violation, probably a criminal antitrust violation, because businesses aren't supposed to get together and agree on prices and coordinate, because what we're supposed to have happen in this country is competition, and you know, the competition will get the best result for the consumer. Well, in the case of agricultural producers, there is a giant antitrust exception, and it's really been that way. It was intended to be that way since the antitrust law, the Sherman Act, was originally passed back in the 19th century. Farmers in this country were always supposed to be treated more favorably and be allowed to combine and share resources, because, you know, throughout history, farmers have kind of, you know, been a different animal, had to been, you know, suffered in a lot of ways. Your crop can fail. I mean, the point is that the government of this country has always kind of wanted to help farmers. So if you apply that ability to the cannabis industry, you realize that, you know, you could have 60 different licensed producers all over Oregon. They could join together, you know, formally or informally, and assuming they were doing it correctly, and they, you know, because you're not subject to all antitrust laws, but if assuming they were coordinating correctly, they really could join together to develop market power, and it would not be an antitrust violation. So
that is news to me. Oh my God.
It's
that
really,
is why are we not talking about that? We need to talk about that for an hour and a half or whatever. Like, because
yeah, we're doing
interestingly enough, from a tax standpoint, they're not allowed to be agricultural, like cannabis itself. Now, hemp had the farm law, you know, farm bill come in and ruffle feathers in 18, but from the standpoint of, from a tax directive, they are not supposed to go on a Schedule F. They're not supposed to be a farm agriculture. They're a C if they're a solo whatever. And even then, as we move up the tax structures, they're not still considered federally, because of that federal illegality, you know, able to transact in markets, you know, that are agriculturally kind of based, is my understanding. So, you know, we are get ready to go down, you know, that is a very interesting rabbit hole.
Yeah.
Because that would fix, if I think farmers could get out of their own egos of, I own me farm, me brand, me name, me whatever, that could in fact be a roadmap for producer states, of which Oregon is, versus New Jersey, which I think is still going to be a consumer state per se, but the ability, even if there's a craft industry in New Jersey, to be able to do something like put in a price floor that might signal to the rest of the nation and the cannabis economy, hey, this is agriculture. Hey, there could be different rules from that standpoint that no, you retailer can't do. But if corn, if soybean, if hazelnut, if weed, this is a different kind of product. Like, that's very interesting to me.
Yeah, and they can do not only that, they can do things like group purchasing. They can share costs, all kinds of stuff to take advantage of economies of scale and to reduce friction between the farms. Like, there's no reason that farms should be competing, like small farms in Oregon should be competing against each other for market share. They should be competing in terms of quality, of course.
Yeah.
But there shouldn't, joining together at least gives them a chance to be insulated from what's otherwise can be a race to the bottom.
Insulated from what is happening now, to Mia's point, there is no there's no incentive to compete on quality. There's only incentive to compete on the lowest price race to the bottom. I educate cannabis dispensaries all day long, and have for many years been the person in the room that says, you dispensary should put a price floor. You should have, if somebody walks in and says, I've got 27% fire weed, you should be like, I will pay you no less than $1,200 for that. If they walk in with the expectation of $900 because they're trying to offload, no, your only cost, you need that cost to be higher-ish so that you're not getting slammed with taxes. So we have this competing problem. Like, if the federal tax burden says you should have high cost of goods sold, the economics of the cash flow says you should have low cost of goods sold, but the problem comes in there, and cannabis is built backwards and upside down from what the economics need to say, or your business versus tax. This idea that there would be an ability to somehow stabilize our own market. We are not at the whim of our own purchasers. If cannabis farms could speak nicely to each other, they could actually create some piece of a floor based on quality, based on sun-grown or regenerative or indoor or some sort of a metric that we already know exists. And it wouldn't be illegal, because I too have said to people as they've come to me and said, well, what about a co-op? I'm like, whoa, wait a minute, antitrust. And I don't know shit about antitrust. All I know is that it exists and it's bad. And so I send them to you, frankly. But the reality is, like, people have stopped even considering that at the Oregon market, simply because everybody's like doing their own little farm, doing their own little thing, having their own little, but that is killing us. And MSOs are winning because they do have some economy of scale, at least even in its own state.
Yeah.
Ooh, Jason, you kicked off a can of hornets in my world. I don't know. Andrew's looking at me like, can of hornets is coming in.
No, I really think that all producers, really all small producers, should be looking at whether they can take advantage of something like this, and whether they can join with other producers to survive, honestly.
Well, with Jason's permission, I would like to maybe explore this further as a standalone, because I of course all of a sudden hear it as a solution to a problem we've been trying to create solutions to. It's hard to bring solutions because everybody feels so down in the dumps about things. But if there is a way to be able to modify and change people's behavior, because incentive could do that, and then you could see a tangible outcome, because we're already talking about how to protect craft cannabis or make a designation, or is there, Appalachia or something kind of like Champagne that could produce, different regional elements. Like, it seems to me that's a great idea, but start with this thing that already exists in the books, this privilege. Start where the law gives you privilege instead of trying to build a whole new law that we have to get through a regulatory, like start with where we're already good.
Yeah.
And maybe try to get people, incentivize people from there. That seems like a really interesting conversation for us as both an Oregon, Washington, and California matrix set of producer states pushing towards interstate. That seems like a very interesting conversation to have in a lot of different ways, especially with interstate commerce potentially coming online in 2 years, 3 years, 1 year, 10 years. I don't know, something at some point. You know what I mean? Oh, I just got all fired up. Sorry. Mia, did you have something else to say? Like, I could talk about this for Jason. Now you're on my list.
I enjoy listening to you.
I mean, there's just such a tax, like my brain goes off on like what bit I know about legal gets clarified with you guys. And then I just go into this, what is the tax solution? There is a true monetary benefit that comes from the ability to be able not to price fix on that top side, but on that floor, because that's the problem we have right now in Oregon and Washington and California is this concept of a floor, because if it goes to 20 cents or whatever, I mean, if the floor continues to fall, the tax rate doesn't, the cash obligations don't, the fixed rates on our farms don't, or our dispensaries, like that's why break-even points in managerial accounting like exist, right? Because you don't want to get below something because it's a death spiral. And we all know, having worked in Oregon, and California and Washington, as long as we have on the West Coast, as soon as you get into a death spiral, the incentive that comes from real human beings needing to really keep their homes, feed their kids, put gas in car, like you said, that death spiral incentivizes just continuing, in my mind, the for-profit prison and legal system that we have, because they are forced it is impossible for them to be good corporate actors. They are forced into the felony, which no state should be, no legal regulatory environment or schema should be trying to do. So I know OHA and the the Oregon Health Authority, the OLCC, the Oregon Cannabis and Liquor Authority here, I know they don't want to force regulation to get people to be felons. But the 280, the tax problem, and this commerce clause, this keeping it inside of its own little state swimming pool, does that organically.
Yeah. Good questions.
Yeah. All right. I want to be sensitive to time. We're totally over it, but thank you all for coming. Jason, reach out to these two lawyers, throw more questions or something. I mean, if other people have questions, please. We've created this environment so that we can try to bring these kinds of tax and policy issues to light because we know the industry participants, service providers, are the solution providers as well. We want to be solution providers. If this industry dies, ain't none of us got a job. We got to go back to those boring jobs that we had before cannabis, and none of us want to do that. So, thank you very much, everybody who's here. Please feel free to reach out to any of us, suggest topics or the like. I think we have something scheduled for February, but we'll put you on the list. Feel free to reach out to Selden, or myself or any of us if you are interested in knowing more and the like. And thank you so much for your time today. It is valuable.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you, Andrew. Thank you, Mia.
Thanks,
Thank
Kayte.
you, Kayte, wherever she went.